r/NoSleep. I'm the caretaker of a remote mountain lodge. It knows you're here, and these rules will keep you safe. Hidden deep in the Rockies, there's a place called Pinecrest Lodge. It isn't listed in any travel guide, and you won't find it on a map. Most people stumble upon it by accident: hunters looking for shelter, hikers caught in a sudden storm, or campers wandering too far off the trail. The lodge has stood for over a century, its logs weathered by snow and time, and despite its isolation, it's never truly empty. I've been the caretaker here for almost 5 years. When I took the job, I thought I'd hit the jackpot: free room and board, a decent salary, and the kind of solitude I had craved ever since my messy breakup back in Denver. My job was simple: keep the generator running, restock the firewood, and make sure the place didn't fall apart during the harsh winters. What I didn't know was that Pinecrest Lodge isn't just old. It's aware. At first, the signs were subtle: creaking floorboards when no one was walking, the faint sound of laughter coming from empty rooms, or the fireplaces lighting themselves at odd hours. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and the isolation playing tricks on my mind. But then, the lodge started testing me. And when I failed its tests, I learned the hard way that this place doesn't forgive mistakes. I'm leaving soon, but before I go, I'm writing this guide for whoever comes next. The rules aren't just suggestions, they're the only thing keeping you alive. Rule 1: always greet the lodge when you enter. This might sound ridiculous, but the lodge knows when you're here. When you first arrive, or any time you return after being away, you need to say, "Hello, Pinecrest. I'm here to help." Say it out loud, and say it with respect. If you don't, the doors might not open for you, and believe me, you don't want to spend the night outside. Rule 2: don't enter room 3 after dark. Room 3 is the only guest room that still has its original furnishings. It's beautiful during the day, with antique furniture and a view of the mountains, but after dark, the room changes. The air grows cold, and the shadows in the corners seem to ripple and move. If you hear someone knocking on the door or calling your name from inside, do not go in. No matter how familiar the voice sounds, it's not someone you know. Rule 3: leave an offering in the dining room every Sunday. The lodge demands respect, and the best way to show it is by leaving an offering. It doesn't have to be much: a plate of food, a small bottle of whiskey, or even a lit candle will do. Place the offering on the long dining table and leave the room immediately. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. Rule 4: the forest is not safe after sunset. The lodge isn't the only thing on this mountain. Sometimes, you'll see shapes moving among the trees, shapes that don't belong to any animal you've ever seen. If you hear something calling your name from the woods, it's already too late. Lock the doors, close the curtains, and wait until sunrise. Rule 5: if the piano plays, you must listen. There's an old upright piano in the lounge that hasn't been tuned in decades. It's silent most of the time, but once in a while, you'll hear it playing on its own. The music is slow and haunting, and it echoes through the halls. When this happens, stop whatever you're doing and sit in the lounge until the music stops. Do not interrupt it, and do not leave the room until the last note fades. I've learned these rules through trial and error. I've seen what happens when they're broken. The lodge isn't cruel, but it has its own way of keeping order. Those who disrespect it, well, they don't stay for long. I'm leaving Pinecrest Lodge next week. My replacement is supposed to arrive the day after I leave, and I won't be around to explain all of this in person. I hope they find this guide before it's too late. And if you're reading this because you're thinking of taking the job, let me give you one last piece of advice: the lodge always knows who you are. It doesn't care about your past, your mistakes, or your regrets. But it does expect you to follow the rules. Fail, and you'll find out why no one ever talks about Pinecrest Lodge. Good luck. You're going to need it. The first time the lodge tested me, I didn't even realize what was happening. It was my 3rd night on the job, and I had just settled into the caretaker's quarters after a long day of splitting firewood and patching leaks in the roof. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and I was already on edge from the eerie silence of the empty lodge. I hadn't been there long enough to learn the rules yet, so when I heard a faint knock at the front door, I figured it must be a lost hiker or maybe someone from town checking in on me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the creaky staircase, the beam cutting through the dim hallway. The knock came again, louder this time, and I hesitated as I reached the door. Through the frosted glass, I could see a shadowy figure standing on the porch. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The porch was empty. I stepped outside, scanning the area with my flashlight. The snow-covered ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. Just as I was about to turn back inside, I heard it again, the knock. This time, it came from inside the lodge. I froze, my breath clouding in the icy air. Slowly, I stepped back inside, closing and locking the door behind me. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, leading toward room 3. My heart pounded as I crept after them, the flashlight shaking in my hand. When I reached the door to room 3, it was slightly ajar, and I could see the faint glow of candlelight spilling into the hallway. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. No answer. I pushed the door open, and my flashlight illuminated the room. It looked exactly as it had earlier in the day, antique furniture, lace curtains, and the bed neatly made. But sitting on the nightstand was a single, unlit candle. The matches were nowhere in sight, but as I watched, the wick sparked to life on its own, the tiny flame casting flickering shadows across the walls. I backed out of the room and slammed the door, retreating to my quarters where I stayed until dawn. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in a shaky hand, the ink smudged as if by tears. "You passed the first test. Remember, the lodge rewards respect and punishes curiosity. Don't forget again." It didn't take me long to realize that the lodge wasn't the only thing I needed to worry about. The forest that surrounded Pinecrest was just as dangerous, if not more so. The first time I ventured into the woods, it was to gather firewood. I hadn't yet learned that the lodge provided everything I needed, and I assumed it was my responsibility to keep the wood pile stocked. The snow was knee-deep, and the trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels. I was about halfway through chopping a fallen log when I heard it, the sound of laughter. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the wind, but it grew louder as I stood there, gripping the axe. "Hello?" I called out, scanning the woods. The laughter stopped. Then, from somewhere behind me, a voice whispered my name. I turned, the axe raised defensively, but there was no one there. The forest was utterly still, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath my boots as I backed away. That's when I saw it, a figure standing among the trees. It was human-shaped but impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were hollow, glowing pits that seemed to suck in the light. I dropped the axe and ran, the sound of crunching snow behind me growing louder with each step. I didn't look back until I reached the safety of the lodge, slamming the door behind me. I later learned that this was one of the things that lived in the woods. They can't enter the lodge, but they'll do everything in their power to lure you outside after dark. Don't fall for it. I've saved the most important rule for last, because it's the one that nearly cost me my life. About 6 months into my stay, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps outside my quarters. At first, I thought it was just another test, maybe the lodge trying to see if I'd learned my lesson about room 3. But when I opened the door, I found something I hadn't expected, a woman standing in the hallway. She was wearing a tattered dress, her hair matted and wet as if she'd just come in from the rain. Her eyes were wide and vacant, and her lips moved soundlessly as she stared at me. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. Instead, she raised one hand and pointed down the hallway, toward the front door. Against every instinct, I followed her. She led me to the dining room, where the long table was set for a feast. Plates piled high with food that looked fresh and inviting, though the smell was faintly sour, like something left out too long. She gestured for me to sit, but something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop. Instead, I backed away slowly, whispering an apology as I turned and fled to my quarters. The next morning, the dining room was empty, the table bare. But carved into the wood where I had almost sat was a single word. Hunger. I don't know what would have happened if I'd taken a seat at that table, but I don't intend to find out. I'm leaving Pinecrest Lodge tomorrow. My replacement is due to arrive shortly after, and I'll leave this guide for them in the caretaker's quarters. To whoever takes this job next, the lodge will test you. It will try to break you. But if you follow the rules, you might just make it through. Good luck. You're going to need it. And remember, the lodge is always watching. Always waiting. Don't give it a reason to turn its gaze on you.